So it's no wonder that the German publisher calls the whole series Eragon. In US, it's different. It's the Inheritance series. It does. How is it in other countries? And do you love it like that? That the Germans put on Eragon on every volume?
Yeah, I actually like what the Germans have done. I think it's a very nice thing. Yes, in the United States, the series is known as the Inheritance Cycle because each of the books deals with Eragon or one of the other main characters inheriting some object or responsibility or role from the previous generation. But the thing is even in America, pretty much everyone calls it the Eragon series. Yeah. So I think the German publishers were smart to just call it Eragon and then to have a subtitle for each of the books.
Exactly.
I mean, even in the United States, I gave the third book a subtitle.
Okay.
And the fourth one will have one as well. So in the United States, the third book is called Brissinger, or The Seven Promises of Eragon Shadeslayer and Saphira Björtschouler, which means bright scales.
Yes.
But most of the countries have used the United States naming conventions for the books.
Yeah.
Although it's a little difficult in some countries because my second book was called Eldest in English. Eldest. And some languages don't have a word that exactly translates as eldest. Like in French, I know they had some difficulty trying to find a word that kind of worked like that.
Yeah. A thing I like very much in the books is the sound. It's a special sound in the whole cycle. It's quite I would say it's kind of polite and you have the battles and you have blood but then there is a sound in the book who shows that Eragon is a very kind of polite person with principles, with ethics and morals who are very important to him. From where does it come? This I think I don't find it in other fantasy books. This special sound.
That is about the nicest thing anyone's ever said about my writing.
Okay.
No one's ever asked me that before. I'm actually glad you asked that. I've done so many interviews. Sometimes I don't. I get bored with some of the questions I've heard many times before. That is a wonderful question. Well, that's a very interesting question. I've never gotten asked that before. I think ultimately it's probably due to a number of different factors. First of all, I grew up in a very isolated place, and during my childhood, the only people I really came into contact most of the time were my immediate family, my father, my mother, my sister. And we developed a way of speaking that, if you know someone for a long time, you have certain jokes with them that only they understand, certain expressions that only they understand. And I think a lot of the sound of my prose, of my writing style is due to that. And also I was brought up, to be very polite and irreverent at times. That certainly comes perhaps with some of the Italian tradition, but all of that went into my writing. But as far as the philosophy and the other elements you were speaking about, which I think maybe is more important than just the sound of the prose, I grew up hearing a lot of philosophical discussion in my house. There were personal reasons for that I'm not going to go into here, but there was a lot of discussion of philosophy and religion and stuff when I was younger, and I paid a lot of attention to it, and it meant a lot to me. And when I set out to write this series, even though it was adventure and battles and standard fantasy fare in one regard, I felt as if I would be cheating the material, as if I would be unrealistic if I had my main character going into battle and killing people and not thinking about it, not feeling it, not reacting to it in some way. I mentioned to you earlier that many of the great warriors throughout history have also been philosophers in some regard. Marcus Aurelius, Musashi, the samurai, and many others. And perhaps they were exceptions to the rule, but I think that it is actually unrealistic to have your main character, fighting and killing and fighting and killing, and it not to have some sort of effect. And I think many stories, especially ones that are sort of escapist thrillers or fantasy, even books set in the modern day, don't really take that into account. And to me, that makes the story much less interesting and much less compelling. If I read a modern thriller, for example, and the hero is, gets attacked by some bad guys in his house or something, and there's a big conspiracy after him. When I read a story like that, I always think, if that were to happen to me, it would affect me a lot more than it seems to affect these fictional characters. And I think that's true for most people. At a certain point, of course, if you're in dangerous situations, you just have to do what you have to do to survive, and you can't worry about it too much. But no, I mean, the questions that Eragon confronts throughout the series, philosophical, moral, ethical, are to me as important as everything else that goes on, because the whole point of the story is that he and the other young characters are growing up. I mean, it's a Bildungsroman, it's a coming of age story, and part of coming of age is not only learning to do what your elders can do, but learning why you should do it.
Yeah.
And maybe why you shouldn't do it, and choosing your path and how you're going to take your place in the world. And again, not considering those issues, I think, is to cheat yourself of another layer of complexity with your story.
Yes, and so you are an exception to the rule, to the fantasy rule, I would say.